Hello, welcome back my friends. If you're new to my channel, my name is Lauren and I am healing my chronic fatigue and adrenal fatigue by healing the old emotional wounds from my past, specifically the attachment trauma that I had in my childhood that so many of us have, old childhood stuff that we haven't healed because we haven't been taught how to do it. And in the case of adrenal fatigue and chronic fatigue, I believe so many times these core emotional wounds are the root cause of the illness, or a contributing cause of the illness, or at least a contributing factor that is making the illness worse. For me, I have found that it is my root cause, because the month I started healing emotional trauma after years and years of trying to heal using external sources, supplements and lifestyle changes and all that, the month I started healing emotional wounds was the month I started healing my body. And that fact, I say it all the time because it shocks me still. I still find it incredible to have that quick of healing. So in this channel, I am sharing my story of healing emotional trauma and wounds for you, in case this information can help you, in case this is a contributing factor for you, in case this is something that you've never even considered could be a contributing factor, or maybe even your root cause. So I'm sharing my story and the things that I learned to help you heal your body by healing your past. Today, I am talking about shame. Shame. Oh, so fun of a topic, Lauren, right? But this is huge. This is huge, you guys. If you've seen my other videos, you have probably seen that I have been working on this core wound, this old wound that is connected somehow to self-loathing. For months, it has felt like this thing, all these facets of self-loathing that's in me keeps getting brought up and triggered in different ways, and just like this sort of nagging thing that I couldn't put my finger on quite what the emotion was. What is the emotion connected to self-loathing and not feeling valued, not feeling loved and accepted and valued and important and cherished in the world? And we all need that because we are social creatures. Human beings need to feel those things. They need to feel loved. They need to feel valued, and they need to feel important to their caregivers when they're children, because that is the first time the children get information about their place in the world and how to survive this world that they're in. Their parents are their first entrance into that, and so we get a ton of interpersonal connection information from our parents. And so the truth is, so much is riding on our parents or caregivers, and it's how we develop a sense of self and a sense of safety and a sense of love and what we're capable of, what this world has in store for us, and how to survive. Any kind of animal and people are all wired in a way to help us survive. Not necessarily how to have the happiest life ever, but how to survive. Those are the primal things that are wired into all of us. And those primal things and information is laid down in the first few years of life, the first 6-7 years of life. The thing is, so much information is gained in the first 3 years when we are pre-verbal, and we don't form distinct memories. And so the attachment to our caregivers, both of them, is crucial for what I'm talking about. Attachment trauma is when there's an experience with a caregiver. This is how I understand it. I'm not going to give you a textbook definition. I've read the definitions, but this is what my takeaway is. That attachment trauma is an experience that you have with one of your caregivers in which you received information, or you took in information that was overwhelming to your little self, your little emotional capacities. It was some in some capacity, it had to do with love and safety. What I have discovered this week is that this thing that I've been talking about with self-loathing, feeling like this thing was the big kahuna, I was right. I just hadn't gotten to the emotion that was caught up in that. What was the emotion that was causing this experience and this turning on myself of self-loathing? What was causing that? What was the emotion causing that? This week, I figured it out. It's shame. 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 And when I get goosebumps because it's so obvious now. It's so obvious. And I've known that I had shame. And yet that I've gone through the last 15 months just accepting that I had shame and not healing it. And so the shame continues. And what I didn't realize is that shame is the emotion that is causing the self-loathing, the lack of self-love, and so much of the, lack of safety, because that's connected to love. And all the emotions in my life that I have felt where I want to cower and shrink and disappear, that's shame. Can you relate to this feeling? I wonder how many people with chronic fatigue and adrenal fatigue have a core wound around shame. To me, I'm still so surprised that I've sort of glossed over it, but that I'm not surprised, because based on what I've learned in this illness and what I have learned to believe, how my beliefs have changed over the last 15 months and really over a couple of years, is that we don't see things really until we're ready to heal them. You can be, and I was talking to my mom about this a week or two ago. We were talking about, she saw a movie where something happened, and all of a sudden in her adult life, in her midlife, she had this wave of overcoming emotion. And yet, a similar scene she had seen in movies again and again and again since her early adulthood, since her adolescence. It's a very common scene in movies that did not very common, but you would see it. You would see this kind of a scene in a movie, and she had again and again and again, but for some reason, in her midlife, it hit her. And that overwhelming emotion and seeing the thing that she didn't have, that she needed in her childhood, overcame her. Now, she doesn't tend to get overwhelmed with feelings like I do, because I didn't, she doesn't have this shame thing that I have, but so she just felt the emotion. She is a pro at moving her emotions through her and out of her. And I get very stuck doing that, just because of the differences in, our childhoods and the defenses that we made, and, all kinds of things, karma, ancestral stuff. But anyway, that's an example of what I'm talking about, because you can be shown some incident can happen to you over and over and over again. And it might be upsetting, it might be annoying, it might evoke some kind of emotion, but it doesn't hit you. Or even some knowledge, you just don't take it in depth. Even though you learn stuff, you don't take it all in until you're ready. Until you're ready, until you have the emotional capacity and the knowledge and the understanding and the, self-love and compassion, or whatever it is that your soul knows that you need to accept that information or experience. That's when it happens, and that's when it comes in. It's the same thing, like if you've ever tried to tell a friend something or family member something about themselves, just trying to be helpful because they're struggling in some way, and they dismiss it and they didn't, no, that's not it. And then years later, you see that they discover it themselves in some other way. And I was like, well, that's what I told you years ago. Or it might have happened to you. There are things that I've been told again and again. I was like, no, that's not true. That's not true. And then eventually it's true. I find out later that it's true, but I wasn't ready to see that. There's something really, important here to understand, because it's so easy to berate ourselves, and, but maybe it's easy to berate yourself when you have core shame. So I learned this because something in me called me to buy this book that was about these 8 difficult emotions and how to move through them. It's not about healing trauma. It's about how to move through emotions that come to us just in our daily lives. And if you have emotional trauma and you have dissociation and armoring against emotions, you have learned to block a lot of emotions, and so you might struggle with this as well. It's just difficult emotions that come up in our lives. If it's one that we have dissociated from or blocked because of something that happened in our childhood, it can cause a lot of problems. And so I just felt called to buy this book, and I've been reading it, and she was just going through the 8 difficult emotions. And so if you look at each emotion, each difficult emotion, and she chose the ones that are just the most common. She's a psychologist. She's been a psychologist for decades, and she just identified the 8 that are the most common for people to experience and the most common that people find difficult to feel in their body. I'll see if I can list them off in my head, but she listed 8. So anger, sadness, disappointment, frustration, shame, helplessness. Yep, I'm missing 2. Yeah, I can't remember the other 2. If you run down the list of the 8, and maybe I'll put them in that description below, since I can't think of it. And the name of the book, I think it's called 90 Seconds to a Life You Love, and the author is Joan Rosenberg. So if you run through the 8 in your mind and imagine, what does each emotion feel like in my body? Everybody's a little bit different, but there are typical ways of feeling each emotion, but they do vary a little bit. So it's subjective. But what I found is when I tried to go through, there were several that I couldn't feel anything, and then there were ones that I felt really uncomfortable. My memory is helplessness. I didn't know what that felt like. I just drew a blank. I just was like, what does that feel like in the body? I have no idea. Shame too. And shame, I just didn't, I was just like, I have felt shame so much that I sort of toggled between being really uncomfortable with even the thought of trying to evoke that emotion, and then also that I wasn't sure exactly what the feeling, where it was in my body. Same with helplessness. Where is it? Where is it held in the body? I wouldn't know. And those are signs that those emotions are issues for you, because it means that you have discarded it, you've pushed it away, because all human beings are able to feel each of these emotions. So when I got a year and a couple months ago, I focused on the helplessness because I really couldn't feel anything. And that was really helpful information. That's one way that I learned, or it was a confirmation of the helplessness mood. I knew that I had this because if you just look at the picture of my life, even though consciously I know that I am powerful, as we all are, and I still have more to heal there. The shame I dismissed at the time. And again, I believe this is because I wasn't ready for it. When I learned that I had learned something called learned helplessness, which is where after a perpetual state of feeling of helplessness as a child, the child learns that it's inescapable. And so why even try? And so the child, and so many people in this world have this. But when I first learned this about myself, I felt such tremendous shame. And I went on a shame spiral. Because I know that I'm not helpless. And the realization that I deep down believe that I'm helpless was so shaming to me that I started on this panicky spiral. My mind was scattered and it just felt like there were spikes coming out of it, and I was spiraling down. I could feel my whole body felt like it was shutting down. And thank God I had been working on self-compassion for months, and I had this havening techniques that I did a video on last time, and I started doing havening, and I did it, and I did it, and I did it. I kept doing it, and and it stopped it. It was amazing. It interrupted that spiral. You don't want these spirals to happen. You need to have a tool like havening or tapping or something, some mind-body experience that you can pull out in these moments when something's overwhelming and it feels like it's getting out of control. That's when you need to pull out these tools, and that really has only happened to me 1 or 2 times, but that was the only time I really had dealt with shame. Since then, I have been dealing with sadness and grief and anger and helplessness. And those were the main ones that I've been trying to unpack. And I've been trying to unpack the core wound and like the cognitive side to elicit some emotion and peel away the little pieces of this giant onion that I talk about. But you know what? I've discovered this week that I know at my core is true. As soon as I realized this, I knew this was true. The core of that onion is shame. And most of the volume of that onion is shame. What's interesting about shame, I was reading about it last night more, this core shame. So there's healthy shame and there's core shame, and healthy shame helps us take pro-social behaviors of sort of shrinking to appease somebody who's really angry or something, somebody who's upset with us, and we sort of shrink our energy to calm them down, and then we can sort of connect. Core shame comes from a perpetual experience as a child of shame. And instead of pointing the finger out to say that, to make the conclusion that there's something about him, we do as children what is actually safe. That's actually a dangerous thing to our little brains to do, to realize that one of our caregivers is inadequate in some way for us and their ability to care for us. It's safer in some ways to point in on ourselves, and that's what a lot of us do. And so I started criticism. Incredible, perpetual. I blame myself. Something was deficient, defective about me. Unlovable, flawed, not good enough, not worthy of love. It's all these emotions, all these things, these phrases that I've been using in the last few months to try to identify, what is this? What is this emotion? What chakra is it connected to? What is the actual core wound? Because self-loathing is just a symptom. Well, it's shame. And shame is, as I was starting to say, is a really interesting emotion because it's actually more than a feeling. So I was reading, so I have like a couple notes here, and I wrote that it's more than a feeling. Well, first, that it's intensely painful, and it generates simultaneous rage and anger out of self-protection along with it. So shame is more than a feeling. It's an entire state that affects multiple systems in the body. It's below the reach of the rational mind. Sense of time slows down, which magnifies everything. It intensifies feedback from all perceptions, particularly the autonomic reactions, which are like blushing and sweating and increased heart rate, things that we can't control. And it heightens body awareness and causes extreme self-consciousness. Being shame-prone also means that a person is prone to low self-esteem, blaming others, holding on to resentments, prone to depression, suicide, anxiety, addictions. It can manifest as fragmented thoughts and speech, pauses, repetitions, false starts, inaudible voice levels, and unclear diction. Gets reported as going blank, somewhat like dissociation. I mean, those things, this going blank has been the story of my life. This stuff, So shame produces an implosion in the body. So what I was talking about is like, how do you feel it? How do you experience it in your body? It's an implosion of the body. Head lowered, eyes closed or hidden. The upper body is curved in on itself as if trying to be small as possible, i.e. wishing to disappear. Wishing to disappear. This has been me. Can you relate to this? Is this you? Can you relate to this? Could this be a part of your chronic fatigue or adrenal fatigue? Could it be contributing? Shame is a sense of smallness, worthlessness, and powerlessness. It's triggered by a perceived break in one's connectedness to others or self. It's compounded by feeling exposed and extremely concerned about another's evaluation of oneself, and it's defined as the emotional experience of another's disdain or disgust, real or imagined. And that last part is critically important because what that means is whether it was real or imagined, it still creates a traumatic state. That shame is such an intense and powerful and all-consuming and scattering feeling that if you have core shame, that is a type of trauma, of emotional trauma. And it's related to your attachment. And so my understanding, my conclusion from that is that would be, a type of attachment trauma. If there's a therapist watching this, psychologist watching this, and I'm wrong, you can let me know. But that would be my understanding based on what I know. Shame is cognitively disorganizing. Due to its intensity and disorganizing impact, it doesn't get encoded in memory precisely, but it has a high potential for a stimulus generalization, just like trauma. Shame spreads easily and it gets connected to many things in our memories. So it's like this unstoppable, to my mind, I think of it as sort of this unstoppable toxic blob that it's like core, it's got this core ball, and then as you live your life, if you have core shame, it's like you're chronically, consistently, constantly being flooded with feelings of shame from your interaction with the world and others. It was just like this cascade. And as I've thought about it in the last couple days, more and more, it's like everything, the most difficult, the most painful, and the things that I struggle with the most in my life. What is it? Shame is at the root of them. Disordered eating, I've talked about on this channel. This deep clinical depression that I experienced for 6 years between high school and after college. What is the feeling that I'm trying to shove down? What is the feeling that I'm trying to dissociate? What is this feeling that I'm dissociating from that is causing weakness and fatigue and so many symptoms that I have talked about that I think that are associated with dissociating from an emotion in this illness? What is that? I think it's shame. Because shame is this overwhelming feeling. And shame is really, really tricky to heal. You have to be ready to heal it. And so I'm going to take that to mean, because I've realized this stuff, I'm going to take that to mean that I'm finally ready to heal this, which is so exciting. I'm so excited about this because it feels like this is the big one. This is the big one, and it's connected to rage. As I read, shame and rage come hand in hand. It's like rage comes as a result. Rage, I think of it as sort of rage for being forced to feel this feeling that is unfeelable. It's so awful. This shame feeling that makes you small and weak. The other fascinating thing that I learned is two in particular of the 8 uncomfortable emotions evoke fear, evoke the flight or fight response. And guess what they are? Shame and helplessness. Now, if you've seen other videos that I've made on this channel, you know how I'm going to interpret that. because the fear response is what causes adrenal fatigue in particular, a perpetual state in fear response, the perpetual state of sympathetic nervous system response of being stuck in fight or flight exhausts the adrenals. And I know that that terminology is debatable, but at some point your brain says, I'm not producing these. You're overproducing. I'm not going to keep producing these chemicals anymore because the overproduction of these chemicals is harming the body. And it is. But then you get this giant down regulation of those, and then you have so little cortisol and adrenaline that you are so exhausted that you can hardly function. So I was just clarifying that terminology of exhausting the adrenals, it's not really accurate. So being in a perpetual state of fight or flight, which is supposed to be merely an escape route or, a way to fight or flee in an emergency situation, becomes a perpetual state when you have toxic core shame and chronic helplessness, learned helplessness. Those are embedded. Those are embedded states in your nervous system that you become accustomed to, you're always in, because you have these emotional chemicals that are being constantly flooded into your system because the wound and what you learned as a child is embedded in your nervous system, in your brain. And so the input you're getting is constantly flooding those chemicals. And so you're in a chronic state of fight or flight, a chronic state of fear. There's a constant state of fear of not being good enough. And if I am not good enough, and I'm not only not good enough, but I'm helpless to do anything. So you put those two together of shame and helplessness, both of each separately, which evoke a fear state, a chronic fear state. I mean, what if those are the two? If you have both shame and helplessness, and maybe the helplessness comes from the helpless feeling of being stuck in a shame state that's so intense and inescapable, you realize that you're helpless to change it. Maybe the helplessness comes from the shame. That's just a theory. But what if you have both of these that evoke a chronic fear state? Oh my gosh, doesn't it seem like it would be inevitable to end up in adrenal fatigue? It's crazy. And the thing is, both of these states, so, and shame also has this element, a core part of the feeling of shame is powerlessness. So helplessness and powerlessness together, it evokes the physiological response of shutting down. Well, isn't that chronic fatigue? I think this is fascinating and exciting. Not exciting that we're in chronic states of shame and helplessness in theory, but exciting to figure this out, because once you figure this out, you can heal it. Now again, shame is really tricky. It's really tricky because it's so intense and it's so disorganizing. Shame can pull you in. And if you have experienced a lot of shame in your life and you think you might have core shame, you might know what I'm talking about. It pulls you in, it pulls you back, and it's like you embody the state of what you're remembering in that moment really viscerally. And with shame, it's like you get stuck there. Shame has this disorganizing quality in which it can cause people to not be able to keep in their mind the difference between then and now when you're thinking about this stuff. And that can be really risky with re-traumatization, which is why you have to be ready to heal this. And so if you are listening to this and it's not really sinking in and it's not going in, it's either not true for you or you're not ready to hear it. And trust that. I really want to encourage you to trust that. So what I was talking about earlier, it's like if this is not hitting something for you that's like an aha moment, or you just feel like you feel some like backing up, or you're just like, okay, that's interesting, but if you just slide on by it, just trust that. But if something really sparks in you and you're drawn in, listen to that too, because you could be ready to heal some shame. But again, don't force, and this is true of any emotion, but I think particularly shame. Shame is one of those emotions that if you realize that you feel shame about feeling shame. Can you relate to that? Do you feel that? Because I really did, and there have been a couple times in the last couple days when I've been reading about shame that I felt shame from reading about shame, and I did some havening. I did this breath exercise that I do. That worked. So, and then I could push through it and not push through it. Then I could continue to read more about core shame. Because you don't want to be, just like what happened with me with the helplessness thing, you don't want to be spiraling. And you don't want to be feeling profound shame. But actually, if you read about shame and you feel a lot of shame, that's an opportunity to heal some shame. So just earlier today, I had something that happened with work, which is a really, really big trigger for me with shame. And it is one of the key places in my life that performance anxiety, and if I have to speak and I'm being evaluated, I know that I'm being evaluated in some way, shape, or form. Even if it's not official, it's just that people are listening to me and I'm assuming that they're evaluating me. It triggers shame. And if I didn't do the perfect job, if I didn't sound as smart or, breezy as I wanted to sound, if I sounded how I felt, which is pretty easy to do if you feel anxious and in a shame and a shrinking state, you're probably going to sound that way. If that's how you're feeling, you're probably going to sound that way. And a lot of times I can fake it, but with in work settings, I have a particularly hard time. So it was great timing because I've been learning about shame. So I did havening after the meeting, and because I was noticing that I was in this really down state for like an hour after this meeting, and I realized, gosh, is this what shame feels like for me? Or is this what shame, the disconnection from shame feels like? This feels a lot like the illness. Weak limbs, extreme fatigue, down mood and energy, and negative self-talk. So I went and did some havening. Havening can be tiring. It can be emotionally tiring, and so I needed to rest a little bit after that. But then, I'm talking to you, so I'm not in a shame state. If I'm in a shame state, I'm cowering, I'm small, I'm stuttering over my words. Which is then the story of my life. This is why I couldn't start it. I wanted to start a YouTube channel over 2 years ago. And the shame was so intense. I didn't know it was shame. But the lack of self-esteem, the intense lack of self-esteem was too great. And I felt such shame that I didn't know was shame when I sat in front of a camera and started talking. It was not happening. There was no, and then if I didn't perform perfectly, if I misspoke a bunch of times, if my brain went blank, which apparently is also shame. There's so much fitting together and it's very exciting. But again, just think about if this is true for you. If you're not ready to heal this, don't heal it. Heal other stuff. If you have core shame, then you have other emotions to heal too, I'm sure. I have spent months and months healing various facets of just anger and sadness and helplessness. But this shame I'm really excited about because there are a couple areas of my life that that I find excruciating, the response in my body, and when my illness will just come back as soon as I'm in these situations, that I haven't been able to make progress on. And I actually think it's because it's shame. What's actually being dissociated, what I'm dissociating from in that moment and causing the illness to come back because I'm blocking, I'm stagnating that, I'm keeping that emotion, that emotional energy stagnant, is shame. So this is really exciting. I thought that it was helplessness because of the weakness that I felt in my limbs and my body and the heaviness. And then I thought maybe it was anger, because the suppression of anger in some people, I learned, be manifested as this sort of limpness. But now I think it's shame. And another thing I want to say before finishing up, and this video is going to be a little longer than most, but I think it's so important because I think shame could be a core part of these illnesses, the energetic composition of these illnesses. If your illness is being caused by energetic sources, at least in part, or the root cause, like for me, then shame might be a core energetic source of this illness. Oh my gosh, and that is huge. What I wanted to say, because I talked in another video as I was trying to unpack my emotions, this emotion of self-loathing, and I started talking about my self-image. This is so helpful. This realization of shame is so helpful for that, because I have struggled my whole life, and I don't know if you can relate to this, with my self-image and putting all of this, it's actually a symptom of shame, is being extremely self-conscious, of placing value on how things look on the outside because you feel unvaluable on the inside. And if you don't feel a core value in yourself, you have a fear that others will not value you because you don't see the value in yourself because of what was reflected back at you from one of your caregivers, then the way a lot of us cope with that, a normal way of coping, is to try to take on traits that you see other people value in other people. So I'll just make sure I stay that way, and that'll give me value. Because I don't have innate value, I'm going to make myself valuable by being these certain things. So the things that I chose are pleasing, looking pleasing, intelligence, passivity, giving, being as pleasing as possible in every way that I could. Never rocking the boat, listening, never speaking, just being there for others. I'm just going to cater to other people. What I need doesn't matter, because what truly matters is being valued. And because I don't believe I have any value, I'm going to make sure that people value. And I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that other people value me. I'm being very vulnerable here because I think it's important. And I have struggled so much, and as this core wound has come up, all of these thoughts have been triggered more and more. And I have found that through this journey, an issue that I have not been able to gain traction on is what happens when I look in the mirror. Oh, I got a lump in my throat. I almost started crying, which is hard to get me to do. Every time that I look in the mirror, which is a lot in the day, I drink a lot of water, so I go to the bathroom a lot and I see myself in the mirror. I find it difficult to look in the mirror, and I'm only sharing this again. I'm feeling very vulnerable. Ooh, vulnerability. That was one of the 8. I'm feeling very vulnerable because. Oh, embarrassment. I think that was the 8th. Because I'm feeling embarrassed. It's a little embarrassing to admit these things, but I'm only sharing them in case they will be valuable for you. And if you feel this, if you feel a comfort in that you're not alone and that this might be connected to shame. For me, it is. So every time I look in the mirror, I see my flaws. I see flaws. And I have noticed over the months, as I've been trying to heal this and stop doing this, that my eyes always look at my abdomen. When I look in the mirror, I look at my abdomen, judge its size, and then decide, this is so toxic, and then decide if I'm happy or not with myself. And let me tell you, most of the time in this illness, because I've had a lot of symptoms with lymph and, oh, and if I see lymph in my face, that's another way that I judge whether I'm going to be good or not, pleasing in my own eyes. So, you know, we do this stuff to ourselves. It's not just about pleasing other people, it's about pleasing ourselves. Because we don't see innate value in ourselves. And so, you know, when I see puffing, so I've struggled a lot with my lymph and a lot of stomach distension. And both of those things are sacral wounds. Well, you know, this has been, when did I really start focusing on my sacral chakra and my lymph and my abdomen? I think it was around 6 to 8 months ago. This is embarrassing too. It's taken me 6 to 8 months to realize the core emotion, the core wound that is in my abdomen, that is in my sacral chakra, is shame. Shame. This stuff that I'm talking about, looking in the mirror and feeling a sense of loathing when what you see is not pleasing, when my abdomen is huge, when I feel distended, when my cells are puffy from lymph and fluid, when my face looks bigger, when I step on the scale and it's gone up. You know, this stuff is not fair. It's not reasonable. It's not fair to my inner child. It's not fair to myself. Why do I continue to do it? And you know what? I have worked so hard on my thoughts and my the mental part of this, to stop doing it, working to make myself stop doing it, because I know it just makes it worse. It just, you know, looking at myself like that. And so I've worked really hard at feeling love and acceptance and looking in the mirror and holding my heart and trying to feel the love and compassion. And I can feel it for moments, but I still go back. And especially if I'm in a triggered state, then it's weeks of looking at myself and hating a part of me. I never hate myself anymore. I mean, this idea of self-loathing implies that, but it's just that there's some self-loathing. It's like, there's certain parts of myself. There's unhealed stuff. But my point is, this is where people get tripped up. If you listen to a lot of personal development and a lot of cognitive behavioral work approaches that you can do, it focuses on the mind and the way you think about things and the thoughts. And that's very valuable. And I gained some improvement from that. But when emotions run deep and they are core to who you are because they were in your early development, they are part of your nervous system. You can't just think them away. And I've been so frustrated with myself of why can't I stop doing this? It's because I hadn't healed the wound. And the wound is shame. So much shame. And you know I talk a lot about emotions. I hope it's clear that I talk a lot about emotions in these videos and less about the actual illness, because this is what I'm using to heal the illness. And so seeing myself in the mirror and feelings of displeasement, that's not a word, unpleasant feelings towards myself. And I'm so careful with the language. And I used to use, years ago, I was chronically using words of hate. And I have been trying so hard to get that word out of my language in here and out there. First, stop saying it out loud. Then I had to get rid of it in here. And so I never say hate to myself anymore. And I use love. I use loving thoughts, and compassionate thoughts. Those are the thoughts. And yet, these split-second moments when I look in the mirror, because that is a wound that I haven't healed. And these wounds are the cause of my chronic illness. Again, because when I started, I had worked for years to heal this illness, to make any progress on this illness, and I just kept getting worse and worse and worse until I started healing my nervous system. First, resetting the nervous system with physiology and mindset techniques, breathing to reset the physiology, and mindset techniques to create a loving space in my mind and stop the negative thoughts. And that's no small feat. If you have toxic shame that is perpetual, that is core to who you are and to the way you've lived your life, that is no small feat, and it can take a long time. That was the first step. And then the second step is the healing of emotional wounds. And that's why I'm talking gosh, this video is so long, but this stuff is deep. And this is extensive, and it's so essential. But in another way, this is the second step in actually healing your nervous system. Your nervous system is, and I've said this before, what I believe is this connection between your conscious and your unconscious. It's the part of your body that connects you to soul, spirit, universe, in my personal opinion, based on my experience of this illness. Your nervous system is what connects your conscious to your unconscious. So this whole process of healing chronic fatigue and adrenal fatigue is about healing your nervous system. So again, this is why we're focusing on these emotions, because the emotions and the energetics of these illnesses is part of your unconscious. The old beliefs, the old emotions, the old wounds, the core emotional wounds, the core emotions and the core wounds that are embedded in your cells and giving constant information, talking to your brain and to your nervous system. This is the cause of this illness. And whether the root cause is emotional or not, it's so important to look at. And now, based on this information, and I feel it so viscerally, I feel so certain that shame, core shame, in combination with learned helplessness, are two core parts of this illness. The deep, deep parts, components, emotional, energetic components of this illness. And those create the fear. If you live in a state of those two emotions, it creates fear. Anger might be in the core too because of its relation with shame. And then the next layer out is going to be fear. So I've gone on a long time about this stuff, but I had to share it with you guys because I really think this is so important. This is so important. And so now the fun part of actually healing the shame. So that's probably what you're going to hear about in the near future as I work to heal various aspects of shame. I think healing shame is how I'm going to heal my sacral chakra wounds. And it's a key piece to healing my root chakra wounds. And those are the main chakras that have to do with this illness. That's where most emotional trauma is stored. So let me know what you think. This was a big one in my eyes. So I don't know how you feel, but I really hope that it was helpful for you. Whether or not you are ready to look at shame to heal it, because you don't want to start diving into shame until you're ready, and let your soul tell you when you're ready. It'll tell you. It'll tell you because you'll have pull energy towards it, not repelling. Our minds would like to tell us that I'm always going to feel repelling energy from it, but that's not what I've experienced in this healing journey. Is that I do, maybe when I'm not ready to heal it, even though shame is extremely unpleasant, this week I'm feeling pulled towards it, even though it's a really unpleasant emotion. And what I've learned is that means I'm ready to heal. At least a part of it. My soul is going to tell me what part I'm ready to heal. It's going to keep bringing stuff up, and any stuff that it brings up is the stuff that I need to heal. So, okay, I'm going to end it on that. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your day, and I will see you on the next video. Take care. Bye.